That was one of the most ludicrous explanations, but some of the others were just almost as ridiculous. Nowhere in there did anybody say, though, oh, well, maybe there were real events. And of course, nowhere in there did anybody actually try to correlate it with the actual geology. Because again, geologists have tried to explain it all away. You know, that it's just some version of modern processes. And if we bring in enough of these different elements, we can explain anything. The Carolina Bays, you know, they said, well, it's a combination of artesian, solution, lacustrine, and aeolian processes. Well, it's almost like, yeah, well, if you bring in every conceivable thing into your explanation, you can torture it enough and make it work. But, you know, good science always goes for the simplest explanation first. And the simplest explanation, I think, is that we're looking at the aftermath of a gigantic multiple meteor strike that pretty much, you know, left its imprints all over the southeastern United States. And that it appears to be dated roughly commensurate with the end of the last ice age. We've talked about the bays in here, Carolina Bays in here. Have any of you been motivated to go look at any of them yet? Ah, okay, so what we need to do is we need to rent an airplane enough to take the whole group.
Sure. Don has a plane.
One at a time.
Paul, yes.
Guess what? Back to last lecture, we left off with Fulcanelli and the cross, and you were hinting at a date that supposedly encrypted into the cross there, and you haven't given us the date, so I was hoping that you would continue with that tonight.
You were. Well, I wouldn't want to disappoint you, Paul. And you see, what I opened actually here was the thing of the Hendaye Stone. And we're going to continue with that, assuming it, here it is. And I was just about to get to it. However, it seems like at some point I'm dumping so much information here that I just don't want you guys to start dropping all the pieces.
Yeah, but do we need to know all the pieces?
Yep. If you're going to figure it out, or if you're going to help me figure it out, because I haven't figured it out yet. Okay, we read this. I'm going to let you guys just read it on your own quickly. What does it say there at the end? It offers proof that alchemy is connected to eschatology. And what is eschatology? It's what we've been talking about for the last year. That's what we've been talking about. We've been talking about eschatology. If somebody asks you, what have you been talking about down there in those lectures with Randall? You can say, we're talking about eschatology. Well, what this does now is it makes a connection between eschatology and alchemy. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with alchemy, or how well versed you are in some of the literature of alchemy, which is a very, very puzzling material that very difficult to get some kind of a handle on what the heck it's talking about.
All I know about alchemy is what I learned in history in high school, but the alchemists were trying to
find gold,
change stuff into gold. That's all I know about it.
Well, once again, that's the orthodox view. Alchemists are looking to change lead or base metals into gold. Is that all that it's about? No.
The whole psychological aspect.
Well, there's a whole psychological aspect of it, which Carl Jung basically expositated on, if that's a word. It sounds good. If Sam can get away with some of his words, I can. Now, what does the last line up there say?
Double catastrophe is imminent.
What is he talking about, a double catastrophe?
Water.
I think that's the most obvious explanation to me would be fire and water. Fire and water. You know, it could be two meteors, and I think two meteors could, in fact. Now, depending on where they hit, of course, if they both land in the ocean, fire is probably not going to be as important. If one of them lands on the continent, though, then fire is going to be a major part of the destruction. All right, here's the photograph that showed up in the last chapter of The Mystery of the Cathedrals. Now, of course, we've gotten into some stuff about the cathedrals, haven't we? And I've presented to you the idea, which is an idea that was the whole idea that Fulcanelli was expressing, is that the cathedrals are textbooks of alchemy. They are the most prominent textbooks of alchemy. That's what they are. The great cathedrals that were being built between the foundation of the Order of the Templars and the suppression of the Order of the Templars. You know, the Order of the Templars were the custodians of alchemical knowledge for a couple of centuries. And the order was suppressed in the year 1310. The final Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake in 1314. With the burning of Grand Master Jacques de Molay at the stake, all of the craftsmen all over Europe, primarily, well, all over France, which is where the Gothic enterprise was mainly centered, essentially set down their tools and went on strike. And that's when you see the end of the great cathedral building era. Coincides precisely with the suppression of the Templar Order. The suppression of the Templar Order drove the esoteric knowledge, the occult knowledge, underground, where it surfaced a couple of centuries later in the form of the modern Masonic order and several other, the Rosicrucians and the medieval alchemists. The wisdom stream that, several streams of wisdom came and conflued through the Templar Order. When the Templars were suppressed, that stream of knowledge dispersed once again, went underground into multiple streams, and then has surfaced periodically. One of the most prominent times that it surfaced in the last 300 years was with the founding of America, which is actually sort of the fulfillment of an alchemical prophecy, which we'll get into at some point, and how the symbolism of America can be interpreted through the meanings of alchemy, through alchemy. But Fulcanelli put this, when his book, you remember the story, Fulcanelli was an elderly alchemist, close to 80, in the early 1920s. He gave these two manuscripts to his young student, Eugene Cancelier, charged him with the task of publishing these, and then disappeared, and has essentially not been heard from again since, with a couple of exceptions. And I told you the story about Jacques Bergier in the laboratory of André Hellbronner back in 1937, being a possible visitation by Fulcanelli, and in the mid-1950s when Eugene Cancelier was contacted and told to go to a certain villa in Spain, which he then found was actually an enclave of alchemists from all over the world who were meeting there, and he had his final encounter with Fulcanelli, whom he then describes in his introduction to the reissue of The Mystery of the Cathedrals in the early 70s. He describes this event and how when he encountered Fulcanelli, he had actually regressed and appeared to be a man in his mid-40s instead of a man who would have been around 110 years old, which I found very interesting. Because the literature of alchemy is full of these kinds of tales, which of course have never been substantiated, and yet, like so many of these tales, they exist out there, and you have to question whether you can just throw them all out or if there is some basis of truth to it. Anyways, with the reissue of The Mystery of the Cathedrals in the 1950s, a new chapter was added, presumably written by Fulcanelli. It was about this stone right here, the Hendaye Stone, which is in the southwestern corner of France, sits right astride the border with Spain in the Basque country. I don't know if you know much about the Basques, but there's some very interesting things associated with the Basque, including their own beliefs as to their origins from a lost island continent in the Atlantic Ocean, which I'll try to get some of that information together and make that available to you, because I actually picked up some of that when I was over there. But right there in the heart of Basque Country, Fulcanelli draws attention to this little rude stone monument here and says it's a monument of chiasm, or a monument of eschatology, or a monument of alchemy. He says clearly whoever designed and built this thing was extremely knowledgeable in eschatology, which the more occult version of eschatology is called Kailism. And he says, Fulcanelli says, that the creator of this monument was well versed in both Kailism and alchemy, and knew that somehow these two insights into the workings of nature were complements to each other. Okay, what's the inscription say on the transverse arm? Henry. And what does that mean again? In the biblical sense, most Christians are going to be familiar with this. What is it?
Christ, King of the Jews.
Yeah, Jesus Nazareus Rex Judorum. Because Jesus in Greek was spelled with an iota. There's no J in the Greek, so it was iota, eta, sigma, omicron, upsilon, sigma. Rex, let's see, Jesus Nazareus, so Jesus the Nazarene, so that gives us the N, and then the R is Rex, which means king, and then I again was another iota, which was the first letter of Judea. So INRI was, associated, it basically, to those who are versed in Christianity, the thing that it brings to mind is the crucifixion. The crucifixion. But to those who are more versed in metaphysics and occult tradition, you know that the crucifixion is not something that's totally unique to Christianity. Now, the Christian version of it is, the Christians have their own take on it, but it essentially is a retelling of the universal story of the sacrifice of the divine king in one form or another. I have a very interesting, in fact, it might be in here. Let me see, I think I have it here, in this slideshow. Let's see if it's here. It's a depiction of Orpheus being crucified on a cross, and it was carved around 300 BC. And it's a beautiful example of a pre-Christian crucifixion episode. But you see, you have to understand the whole meaning of the slaying of the divine king and what that refers to. And I think that there's a whole occult level to the crucifixion story that mainstream Christianity has missed, and that was.
So the Krishna was the.
Yes, so was Odin. Odin was crucified on the Yggdrasil tree.
Also the Mithra from the Persian.
Yes. There have been many of them who were crucified in one form or another, long before Jesus mounted the cross. Anyway, so we have this INRI, but we found out there's another meaning to that acronym, right? What is it?
Igneous. Neolithic Rocks Incorporated.
Yeah, that's it. Igneous Natura. No, just actually Igni Natura Renovator Integra. What is that? Roughly translated, it's through fire nature is wholly renewed. Through fire nature is wholly renewed. Okay, so that's one side of the cross. Now we have this pedestal, which has 4 images, and when you circumambulate it in a counterclockwise direction, as you approach it, you come upon this great 8-pointed star. Does it look familiar to anybody? Well, we'll see. Then as you circumambulate it, you would go from the star, you'd come around to the moon, this kind of fairy tale looking moon with the eye here, and then you come around to the sun. Now when we look at this, I'm sorry that the quality of this isn't better, but let's describe what we're looking at here. Does he look like a benign sun? No, he doesn't look like he's in a too good of a mood, does he? He looks like he's kind of pissed about something. Yes, Don?
It looks, that image looks like something that came out of Central America.
It does. I have thought that myself. It does.
And what about the stars?
What about the stars? The 4 stars? What else? You see there's multiple rings, don't you? Multiple rings. Also there are rays. Notice that there are 2 lengths of rays. There are long rays and short rays. What kind of an idea might that? And then we have this thing. What's the basic overall shape? What's the geometric term for that thing? Ellipse. An ellipse. The ellipse is divided into four, and then there are these alchemical symbols in each of the four quadrants, which is the alchemical symbol for the alembicum vitrum, which is the container in which the alchemical transformation takes place. Now, for those of you that are familiar with it, let's see, I think we should, okay, here's an exploded view. If you spread the thing out, you see, you go great star, moon, sun, and this, which we could surmise might represent the four ages of the world, perhaps. Look at the star up there. What is the number of this trump? 17. And then 18, so we go from, in the Tarot sequence, we go from 17. 17 is the star, 18, the 18th trump is the moon, the 19th trump is then the sun. Now notice the image of the sun. Notice there's two kinds of rays coming off the sun. Just like on the Hendaye Stone, it's got two lengths of rays. This shows two distinct types of rays coming off. Then after the sun, we have judgment, and you'll notice the cross on the banner there. And then that is followed by the world. So you have this vegetation ellipse here, and then you have the signs for the four ages. So just like on the Hendaye Stone, you had an ellipse with a cross in it, and then you had signs for the four ages. Could it be that whoever carved, this unknown alchemist who carved the Hendaye Stone, was familiar with the same symbolism that worked its way into the Tarot deck? I would say it's quite a coincidence, if not. The figure here, notice that the girl has in her hand. Now this goes back to the Paul Foster Case deck, which I think was designed in the 1920s. Of course, the DNA helix was not discovered until the 1950s. But you see what we have there? She's holding two helixes that are coiled opposite, just like the DNA, separate strands.
Got a thought.
Uh-oh.
Would that be wheat, the green thing around, would that be wheat berries and possibly, don't I have pasta in her hands?
I never thought of pasta, Don. But now that you mention it, I am getting kind of hungry. I never thought of pasta. That's probably...
The reason I thought of pasta was it kind of looks like wheat berries.
Uh-huh. Well, I don't know. I'll ponder on that one and let you know what I think in a couple of weeks. Then we have this transverse arm, the inscription on the other side, O Crux Ave Spes Unica. Actually, here's what it's... On the transverse arm of the cross, a Greek cross, is found the following inscription, consisting of two strange parallel lines of raised letters, forming words almost running into each other. Certainly, it is easy to recognize the well-known phrase, O Crux Ave Spes Unica, which means, Hail, O Cross, the only hope. Now, what he's done, whoever carved this, he took the S that was supposed to be at the beginning of spes, and he put it at the end up here. He displaced it, which first would make one think that he was extremely careless. But then, as Fulcanelli points out, that's a very common strategy or common tactic that alchemists employ to throw people off. They'll throw in something that looks like a mistake, but it's not a mistake. It's supposed to clue you to some insight. Fulcanelli says that the letter S, which takes on the curving shape of a snake, corresponds to the Greek letter chi, which is, even though it's pronounced chi, it looks like an X. It's the Greek letter X. And it takes over its esoteric meaning. What do we know about X? X? Yes, X marks the spot. Thank you for that. Now, it is the helicoidal track of the sun. Now, what would a helicoidal track look like? Well, we just saw what a helicoidal track would look like. Like this pasta right here. Right here. That's a helicoid, what she's got in her hands.
I know 21 of these numbers are very important. Number 17, it is the descent of the man or spirit from heaven, and the 19 is the creation, and 21 is the number of the duality to the unity.
So you've studied the tarot?
No, just it came to me.
Oh, well, the numbers do have significance. And to get into what the significance is, you'll notice that each card has not only the number, notice that there's a letter, a Hebrew letter down here. Right? That's Hebrew letter. That's the Hebrew letter Tav. And Tav also has a meaning, a literal meaning. The meaning of the letter Tav is cross. It means the cross. Okay, so there's obviously some kind of interconnectedness going on here. And in the tarot, of course, 21 starts the cycle over again. There's actually 22 cards in the major trump. And there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And so what we see here is this correlation. Now, if you've studied Kabbalah, you know that the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are highly symbolical. And each one has a meaning. What's that letter there in the lower right-hand corner? Resh. What does Resh mean? It means the head. And then we've got on 20, what's that letter down there? Sheen. And Sheen means fire. So here's the element of fire being introduced here again. Notice how fire is the letter that's on the card of judgment. What does this judgment mean? Well, this is referring us to the stories about Judgment Day, which is basically the prophetic, the prophetic vision of something that is supposed to come.
What are the points under the angel?
Well, that's the angel's power.
Oh, okay.
The nimbus, it's called. That's the radiant power of the angel.
Don't you see that judgment means that a man and woman from two, when they get together, they create a unity, that is the child, and the child is the result of their behavior, and their judgment comes in the son.
Oh yeah, and I totally think that the more powerful the occult symbols, the more layers and levels of meaning that there are. And the fact that it means one thing doesn't mean, with occult symbolism, it's not either or. That's not how it works. The power of an occult symbolism is usually in the multiplicity or layers of meaning, complementary meanings that can be derived from the symbol. Don, what is it?
Back on 17, I wanted to ask you a question about, can you back up one?
Mm-hmm.
All right. You notice her right foot
Mm-hmm.
is not in the water.
Right.
It looks like it's just
On the water.
on the water. But she's balanced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that suggests to me the possibility that, she's able to hold, in other words, she's not immersed in the water. The fact that she's above the water, I mean, that's how I look at that. She's above the water there, she's pouring out the water. If you look at the Dresden Codex, you see the goddess of destruction on the Dresden Codex pouring out a vase of water that in the Dresden Codex represents the waters of the flood that's about to drown the world.
Okay. Okay, because that looks like a river on the right side and an ocean on the left.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the final one. So then we have this. And we have this. Now, we were reading this. The helicoidal track of the sun, having arrived at the zenith of its curve across space at the time of the cyclic catastrophe. So clearly, Fulcanelli here is somehow linking the movement of the sun with the timing of the catastrophe. It is a theoretical image of the beast of the apocalypse, of the dragon. What's one of the meanings that we now associate with the dragon?
Draco.
Draco, yeah. And what's the significance of Draco?
That's where the comets come.
Yeah. Well, we've seen that all over the ancient world, comets and meteorites are depicted as dragons. That's one of the meanings of the dragon symbol. Now, in this case, we see it's the theoretical image of the beast of the apocalypse, of the dragon, which on the days of judgment spews out fire and brimstone on macrocosmic creation. Thanks to the symbolic value of the letter S, displaced on purpose, we understand that the inscription must be translated in secret language, that is, in the language of the gods or the language of the birds, and that the meaning must be found with the help of the rules of diplomacy. What is the language of the birds? English? Not exactly. What is the language of the birds?
Music.
What are the rules of diplomacy? What do diplomats do?
Talk.
Negotiate.
They have the ability to tell somebody to go to hell in such a way that they're looking forward to the trouble.
Okay.
True.
That wasn't quite the meaning I was looking for. Well, what do birds do? The language of the birds. See, the language of the birds is the same as the language of the gods. The birds, basically what characterizes birds more than anything is flight, the ability to fly. And, you know, whenever you see ancient depictions, whether they're Sumerian or Egyptian or whatever, of the gods, how are they always depicted? How do you tell the gods if you're looking at an inscription? They're the ones with the wings. They're the ones with the wings. The rules of diplomacy, meaning the diplomats are the ones that go from basically one nation to another nation. They're the ones that are the go-betweens between different orders of civilization. All right? The language of the birds is basically the language of symbolism, the all-pervasive language of symbolism that's hidden all around us. It's in the words we speak, it's in the images of our day-to-day life, we just don't know how to recognize it.